All right. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. I hope our day has been great. All right. So you're welcome to class 19 of this series of DSA software development class. And today, like the last class, will be very hands-on. We do a little bit of lecture here and there, but the bulk of our conversation or the bulk of today's class will be practical, will be writing code, and I will explain as we go, right? Okay, and during the process, I'll be taking pauses at interval to answer your questions while we are doing the coding as well. So let me walk you through today's class and what we'll be building today. I'll show you the end product just like we did the last time as well, and then we'll gradually work our way to the end of the product. But before we do that, I'll just give an explanation of some of the things that we will encounter in today's class and some of the things that we'll be using as well. So we have a code base that we're already familiar with, which is the quotes API. We wrote that sometime, I think some couple of weeks ago. And I did remember that you were given an assignment, although an informal assignment, just to challenge you that the quotes API that you should try and connect it with a database. So I've gone ahead to do that now, and I'll be showing how that was done. So we are also going to follow the same pattern that we've been using since we started this class, which is we provide you with a repository containing the code, and then we try to explain. And the reason why we do that is we figured out that the time we have for the class may not be sufficient to type out all codes, and then we don't want to leave you guys hanging. So we want to ensure that you have working codes, even though we don't write it in the class. We don't write all of them in the class, but at least you can have something you go back to study, right? So we've already connected the backend API to a database now. Before now, we were reading quotes from a file. So now you'll be fetching quotes from a database. And the reason why we have a database, without going into too much explanation, is that using a database scales better. You can undo a lot more requests, right? Imagine if you're using a file. Once someone is reading from that file, another request that comes in, we have to stay in queue until the other request is done reading from that particular file. But that's not the case for a database. A database can accept multiple transactions per time, and that's one of the reasons why we go for a database, right? So, and then we have a React app that we'll be setting up to get those quotes. So it will be connecting to an API. The React app will be able to show you all the quotes, and then you'll be able to post new quotes, edit an existing quote, or delete an existing quote. So the entire CRUD process, which is create, read, update, delete, we are going to go through that today. And then, like I mentioned, there's an accompanying Git repository that contains the code for this class. You already have access to the API one, but there is a new repository for the quotes app that I will also be sharing with you. All right, maybe I'll just do that while I still try to introduce the class. So I have in my slide, I think at the end of the slide. And by the way, the slide is already on the LMS, so you can also go there and download the slide to follow with the class. I mean, there's not so much content on the slide, but if you want to copy the links that that we'll be using, you can easily do that. So go to the LMS in your files, and you will see the slide for today's class. All right. So as I was saying, describing what we encounter in today's class. So these are the two links that we'll be using for today's class, right? The first one is the repository for the React app that we'll be working on today, and the second one, which you already have before now, is the repository for the API. Okay, so you guys can go ahead and clone the two repository. So like I mentioned, the second repository, which is for the quotes API, has some new updates. So if you have one before now that you already cloned, you can clone a fresh one, or you can pull the latest update. I believe in your GitHub class, you were shown how to pull latest update. So the latest update is in the main branch, so you can just pull the latest update from the main branch. And now I'm talking about the basic, the DSA basic API repository. All right, so those are the two links. You guys can do well to follow the README file in those repositories, just so to set up your API and your app. All right, so as I was saying, we have a React app, and you already see the link to the React app. And yeah, from last class, we started with building a portfolio site, and we also shared the link to that as well. I hope you guys, after the class, went ahead to play around with the code base to get yourself familiar with some of the things that you've been taught in the class so far. And in that last class, we did different levels, right? We started from level 1, where we just did HTML and CSS. And then level 2, we converted the code to React. And then level 3 added a little bit more complexity to the code base. And then level 4, we started pulling data from APIs, right? So if you, after the class, went to level 4, some of the concepts that was applied in level 4 are what we will unravel in this class today, okay? So communicating with an API, and then much more than where we stopped in level 4, because today we'll be sending requests to an API, posting data to an API, and updating records on a database via the API as well. And then we'll be deleting record from a database via the API. Okay. So with all of that said, these are the things that we'll be looking at today in today's class. We'll go through a live demo of a full working app, and there will be a live coding session where I'll try to explain some of the things that may be new to you that we've not covered before. Then we explore the full code base together. So the code base that is in the GitHub repository that I shared with you, we'll go through them together, okay? So as to give explanation to some of the things that may seem strange. I mean, it's not altogether strange if you were in the last class and you went ahead to play with the code base. You'll see some similarities with what we'll be doing today. And then lastly, we explore the data generated by the app together. So we have a database, like I mentioned, and then we explore those data in the database. And then at some point in the class as well, I want you guys to play with the app itself, create quotes, right? I will be sharing the link to the live app. So I already have it hosted somewhere. I'll share the link to the live app when the time comes, okay? So you play with the app, create posts, delete posts, updates, and then we explore the data, right? Okay. So that's that for what we'll cover today. And then the objective for today's class is to have built a full stack app. Even though we already built part of it before now, we have the API part. And now we'll be adding a working front end to it. We'll learn how to use Fetch. So Fetch or Axios, you can use any of those two to get data from an API or to post data to an API, okay? And then we display the retrieved data on the front end. And then I'll be showing you some of the things that you can do on the front end to either optimize how you're pulling data. But I'll just show you some of those things. I know it might be a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but as we get along, there will be time that you need to optimize how you're pulling data from an API. I will touch on that briefly. Like I said, we'll be exploring the data generated via a database client. During your database class, you were shown how to use MySQL. And then we explained to you that MySQL is a relational database, right? But today I will be using Postgres. Postgres is also a relational database, and it's based on SQL. And it has similarities with MySQL. I mean, if you know MySQL very well, you can work with Postgres without any issue. But that's not the point. MySQL or Postgres is still the same way that you will interact with any of them that we'll be looking at. And then I'll show you the clients that I use myself for exploring a database. But then you can use any of the clients that are available to you. May I just enjoy this particular client? But I will show you once we get to that part of the class. You can go ahead to use anyone that you're familiar with. Some of you might have SQL Workbench, and some might be able to use their PHP MyAdmin to also access data and visualize data. I mean, just as you were shown in your class where you were manipulating data in the database, so you can still use PHP MyAdmin to explore your data. But the whole point is just for us to see how the front end ties into the API and where the data is stored in. That's the whole point of exploring the data that is being generated. Okay, so that's that about the learning objective for today's class. So the way we'll do it today is we split the class into probably 3 parts. So to help us achieve this objective, we'll do a demo first, showing you the full working app and how it works and all of that. Then we'll go to a live coding session to touch on the important parts on the React app. So when I'm saying React app, that is what you see on your browser, right? And when I say API, that's the back end, as you may have it. So we'll break down the different parts of the app. We'll look at the different parts of the API as well, especially the parts where we are now connected to a database, okay? And then we'll look at the data that has been generated. All right. So for the live coding session, like I mentioned again, we'll touch just the key parts that may seem strange to you or where you might want to start asking questions. Okay, so that's that for the breakdown of the class, and I hope that you guys will be able to follow through as we begin to do all of this. So we jump right into the finished app now. And I'll be sharing my browser to show you how the app works. So it's a very basic app, just displaying a random quote on the home page. and you have some other pages where you get to interact with the API. So now seen on your screen is the app itself. I'm going to zoom in a bit so that you guys can see better. All right. I mean, the information on the screen is not useful as such, or is not important, but just so you see how the app works. So on this button here, once you click it, you get a new quote. That's how it's meant to work, right? And you can view all quotes also. And by the way, if you guys remember Upscotch, we also look at Upscotch as well to see how the API gets data. I'm very sure you guys are still very much familiar with some of the data that we were pulling then. Okay, there's an application error. I don't know why that is. But anyway, while that fixes itself, let's look at the data that is being pulled. Just give it a few seconds, you'll see the data being pulled. And the reason why it's taking a bit of time is where it's currently being hosted. It's a free hosting, so the server goes to sleep after a while, so you need to wake it up. So you see that the first time you click send, it drags a bit. But that's not always the case, you know. It's just because we are using a free hosting, and that was what impacted the app itself, because it was taking a bit of time to pull the data. All right, so we have our app. As I was saying, you click on get new codes, and it gets a new code for you. It gets a new code for you. Also, let me share the link with you guys so that you can also start interacting with the app itself. So here is the link to the app. Hopefully you guys can see it. I've tried to increase the font size. So that's the link to the app, right? You can click on it and play around with it as you see fit. I'm also going to drop it. Hopefully you can get it in the chat section. So you should keep looking at the chat section. At some point you will see it there. But then, going back to the app itself, like I showed you, you can generate new codes. I mean, these are simple stuff, but it shows some really important stuff as well. Like I mentioned, the entire CRUD process of creating, updating, deleting, and reading, you get to see all of that in action. And then another button we have here is to view all the quotes that are available. Right now we have, I think we have 5 quotes. I'm hoping that by the end of this class we have much more quotes than this after you guys have interacted with the app. And you can edit a quote. Let me edit this. Edited, right? And then update the quote. And scrolling that, you will see that the edit has been applied. So you can edit and you can also delete. Let's delete that. Let's delete this mine here. And once deleting happens, you see that the number of quotes reduces. We had 5 before, now we have 4 quotes. All right, so that's that about the app itself, right? And like I mentioned, we have the endpoints for each of these. For this one, for the quotes, let me see if I can increase this. So for the quotes, it lists all the quotes that are available on the back end, and then you have a code /random that shows you a random post. So it just fetches a random post or random code from the backend and displays it. And we have other endpoints, but once you pull the API, you see in the documentation for the API all the endpoints that are available. And also, by the time we are exploring the fully written code base, I'll show you all the endpoints that are available. Okay. So that's that for the app. So now let's jump into writing some code. But before we do that, and as it will be the pattern for this class, I will talk for a stretch of time and then take a pause to look at our questions. So I'll just do that a couple of times, just so that we have enough time to really go into the things that we need to go into today. But after looking at your questions, by the time we come back, we'll jump right into writing some code. Okay. All right. Looking at the questions now, looking at the chat section now to see if there are any questions. So someone is asking how they will clone. Let me get the link for the app. I think is the app that you might want to clone. I mean, it's the app that you really need details on. The other one you already have the link. So to clone, what you need to do, let me clear this up. I believe you're still seeing my screen. You're just going to do git clone and then the git repo. Okay? And that's it. So if you do this, it will clone the app. I already have it on my system. So, all right, well, let me see if I can actually show you really how to. So I'm jumping into my terminal. This is my terminal right here. Although it might look a little bit different, but it works the same way like your typical terminal works. All right, I'll check where I am, then change directory to where I want to pull the code into, then git clone the repo, and then I'll call it a name, test. All right, so hitting enter, and then it pulls the repository. If I list my folder, you see that we have, okay, I named it basic API test. That is wrong. That should be basic app test. But then it's just a name. It really doesn't matter. But just so that we are not confused, let me change the name of that folder to basic app test. So the command is move basic API test, then change it to basic app test, and then if we list, okay, that has changed. So we have that already pulled now. So that's how you that's how you clone the repository. Okay, so that answers that question. I hope you're not blocked by that. Okay, let's look at other questions that might be coming up. All right. So again, once you're done cloning, you change directory into the project that you just cloned, right? And then you have to do npm install so that all the dependencies are installed. Okay. All right. So I don't think there are new questions or anything that needs my direct attention. It's good that you guys are also helping yourself out. Okay. So let's go ahead into writing some codes. So what we need to do first, let's assume that you are starting this from scratch, right? And you're not pulling the code base that we already wrote, right? So like I showed you the last time, you can use Remix. And the reason why I use Remix for a React app is that it's very straightforward. I mean, it already has things set up for you. And all you just have to do is run this command on your terminal, npx create remix latest. And Remix also has some templates. So there is a template that comes with Tailwind and many other stuff as well, which is like a go-to for me, especially when it comes to very simple projects. So instead of stitching together and looking for where to pull in Tailwind, remember in the last class I was showing you that you can get your Tailwind from a CDN, or you can do npm install Tailwind and all of that. But using this command, npx create remix latest, and specifying the template remix run remix template remix, it pulls all the dependencies that you need, and it sets up a project that you can easily jump into and start working with, right? So that's what we have here today. And I already went ahead to run the command, and after doing that, I have this folder structure, which is also similar to what you will have when you clone the repository. So the app is same structure. You have app, and you have a public, and then you have a package.json, and so on and so forth. And where we want to pay attention to is in the app section. And in the app section, where we want to pay most attention is the route. So what happens in the route is that looking into the route, you see that there's an index._index.txs for a remix app. That is seen as the home page. And if you want to create more pages for a remix app, all you just have to do is create a new file and give it a name. You can say about.txs, right? And here you just write your code for about, right? You can do something like export function about, and then you return some things on the home page. Return a div that says this is the about page. Okay. And we need to export this though. So I haven't done this, and then we serve the app by doing npm run dev. Oh, you have a git somewhere. Let me correct that. Do npm run dev, and then you go to your browser on this link, localhost 5173. So you see a remix, which is the default, and when you go to about, you see the about page, which I just added, that says this is the about page. So you see that it's a lot easier. I mean, easy is relative anyway, but for me, I consider it really easy to work with Remix, especially when you have to deal with a multi-page app. And that's why I keep reaching out to it, especially for this course, in that anyone can just get started with it without so much hassle. Okay, so that's that about Remix. So what we'll do next is clean up the app. You know, when you install Remix by default, it comes with this default page, and I showed you something like that in the last class where we had to clear it up. Okay, so let me close this terminal so that we have more space to work with, and also close the sidebar. All right. So in clearing this out, we just clean up everything that is here, essentially, so that we have a blank space to work. For now, I'll keep a placeholder. This is the home page. And also we don't need all this extra code here because the code using it we've already removed, so don't need it anymore. So we delete that as well. So now we are left with this, which is quite similar to what we have on the About page. So clicking Save here and then going back to Remix, to the browser, you see that it shows exactly what we have here. So this is where our work begins. So for this class, I want to add a bit of structure to how you may want to call an API. I mean, you can do that from within the home page, right? Which isn't a bad idea. But since you'll be using again some code, so it makes a bit of sense to actually separate concerns. I believe some of you will remember when we were dealing with architecting the app, we did talk about briefly on separation of concerns. And what that means is that every part of your app have a function, and some functions are closely related together. So if a function is closely related to another, it makes a lot of sense to just put those apps or put those functions together, right? That's the basic idea behind separation of concerns. So what I would do here, let me close some of these things that we're not using anymore. Okay, I think we'll still come back to this. So let me, all right. Anyway, let's just focus on what we have for now. So what I want to do is, I said we will be pulling data from an API. So I want to create like a service file, and we call it service because it's going to be serving a particular purpose, right? So it's like a service layer that is providing us some services, some related services, right? So I'm going to create that service file. Also, as part of separating concerns, you can separate a concern by putting it in a folder. So in this instance now, we can have a services folder. And in it, we say we have a code service. And what the code service will be doing is it's going to serve as a layer between the React app and the API backend. So it's going to expose all the endpoints that the React app will be calling in order to get quotes, in order to post quotes, or in order to delete, and so on and so forth. So we call these code service .ts. And what we have in the code service is, like I mentioned, an exposure of the endpoint. So when we started earlier, I did mention that we have the endpoint already hosted, and here is where it is hosted. This DSA basic API on render.com is where the API is currently hosted. So we start from there, and then we say, okay, let's have a base URL for our API. Okay. So that's the base URL. Every other API call will need this base URL. I mean, that's why we call it the base, right? All right, let me collapse this so that we have more space to work with. So we have a base URL. And then the next thing that we'll need, because we are using TypeScript and want to be type safe, let's define some interface. We need two interfaces, one for quotes and then one to handle API responses. The API response is the response that we get from the API, and the response will be like containing a list of quotes or a singular quote, Well, yeah, and sometimes it will just return probably true or false, whatever the case may be. So export interface, if you guys still remember how to create an interface. And interface is just a type, right? So for our codes, we are saying we have a code that has an ID string, contains a text, which is the code itself, also a string, and then it has an author that is also a string, and then it contains tags. So the tags was what I showed you earlier on the page. So these are the tags. So on each of the quotes, there are tags sort of describing what type of quotes it is. I mean, again, all of this data or content we are seeing here is just for explanation's sake. But anyway, the tags they are arrays of string. So we have that. And then we go ahead to do our API response export interface. API response. And the API response, we want to pass a type to it so that we can type the data that is being returned. But in the API response, we have a status code. And a status code is the HTTP code that is being returned with the API response. So in a request, you have different HTTP codes. If you have a 200, the API is saying that everything is good. So the API is telling the client that the request you made came back with a successful response. If you have a 404, the API is telling you that the resources that you are looking for is not found. If you have, say, 500, it's telling you that there's something wrong on the API side. So those are the status codes that a typical API response will come back with. I mean, there are other ones like 403, there is even 201, and many more like that. So we are writing a type for the status code that the API would return. So that would be a number, and then message will contain a message that is being passed from the API. So in the case of random endpoint, where is the random endpoint? You see that it came back with a message, or there is a message, right, that says random quotes received successfully. So essentially we are just typing the structure of the response that the API is returning, right? That's what we are doing in the code. So we have a message string, and then lastly there we have the data, and data is going to be of type T. You will see how we'll get to use this in the code itself. All right. So now that we have that, let's now have our service. We export const quote service, which is going to be an object of functions, right? and all of them are async functions. I don't believe that we explained what async functions are. So async functions, they are functions that they run, but they also don't run like in real time. So it's more or less like you send someone on errand, and then you wait for them to come back to deliver the message. But while waiting for them, you also get to continue with other things that you need to do. It's not like you say, oh, go and fetch me water, and then you stand and pause and stop breathing until the water comes back, right? So the same thing that happens with async functions, because the computer cannot wait, or your server shouldn't wait on just one single single command, or on just one single request, or I mean, it shouldn't just wait on just a singular item, right? So there are times that it starts the process of asking for a resource, for instance, and then because such a resource won't come immediately, so it just goes ahead to do other things. And by the time the response comes back, it comes back to it to pick up from where it was before. So that's the whole idea of having a sync function. So in this case now, we say we want an async function for getting a random quote. So what happens now is when the request is going out, it waits for the API to respond, but the server doesn't pause itself until that response comes back. It only comes back to this get random quote once there is a response, essentially, right? So we have an async get random quote, and it returns a promise. So like I was saying, it's just saying, oh, I promise to give you a response, right? So that's why we have a promise. So when you make the request, it's saying, okay, I have heard you. I'm going to get the request for you. I'm promising to get you a response to your request. I mean, that's essentially what that is about. So we have API response that we defined up there, and then we have a type quote. All right, so that's the type of the promise that we are expecting. Okay, what happens in the get random quote? We are expecting a response we are awaiting a response from the API using a fetch. We defined up there a base API, so we now use that here now. Base URL. And what the API endpoint we want to interact with is the random API, right? So quote the random, which is what we have right here. So we have quote the random is the URI to the random API, while the back portion is from our base URL, which is here, right? So that should be sufficient for getting a response from the API. So when the response comes, we want to return that response to whoever calls get random quote. So we are returning response.json. So what this essentially does is it converts the response to a JSON object, which is ready for our use on the app side. Okay, so with this singular endpoint, or with this singular service function, we can actually fetch data on the front end. So let's go to so we already have this, let's save it. I think everything is looking good. So we'll go to our index, our route, we go to our index page, which is like the home page, right? Like I mentioned earlier. So this page essentially, we go back there and then we implement the code that actually calls the service function. And the service function, as we just implemented it, calls the random quote endpoint. So there is a way to do it in Remix that optimizes how you call your endpoint, and that's what I'm going to show you. Like I mentioned when I was doing the breakdown of the class, that I'll show you an optimized way. I mean, there are other ways to call an API endpoint, but since Remix already has this particular way of doing it, I think we should just utilize it. So for Remix, you can have a loader function, and what that loader function does is that when you are hitting a route, so for instance, when you come to the index page, right, what the loader function does is that before the page fully loads, the loader function calls whatever is written inside it and makes the data available before the page is loaded, as against loading the page and then showing blank, right, and then waiting for the data to come in. So that's an advantage of using loader function in Remix. I mean, other frameworks have how they also handle it, but anyway, let's just go ahead and show that. So my aim now is just to show you end to end. You have an API endpoint and you are calling the API endpoint and you are seeing the data on the front end. So that's my aim, right? So we write the loader function, export async function. I already explained what async function is. Loader, and inside here we declare a variable quote and await response from a quote service. Okay, autocomplete is already doing that, and then we get random quote, and then we return quotes dot data. So that's how you do a loader function. And then when you go inside your index function, which is what shows on the screen, and then you pull this quote that is in the loader function into here. So you do const quotes from use loader data. Let's specify the type of loader. Right, so this in itself is enough to give us the response from the API. So we have quotes now, right? So let's display something from quotes. Let's show the text. So going back to the home page, you see now it shows you a text, a random text. So if you refresh the page, it should show you another random quote, and so on and so forth, which is essentially what is happening in here. Just that the difference is that it is now styled. So we have styling and all of that. That's the only difference. But this is essentially the same thing that is going on here. So that's that for pulling data from the API, right? I know I showed you that also in the last class, but didn't go into detail of how you go about it. So now going back to the structure that I did mention, like having a service layer for for pulling data from an API. You see now that separating concern sort of makes things organized, right? Like right now, if you want to add more services, like service to add a new quote, you can easily just do it here, and then you call the service function from wherever you need it. So, all right, I think we can just sort of stop this portion here, given that we successfully actually did pull data from the front end, and then you can go back to the full code that has been written and then find the similar service folder. I mean, we have exactly this in that, so it shouldn't be difficult for you to go through. So now, what we want to go into is actually have you guys interact with the already loaded app. I want you to add more data to the app, and the reason why we are doing that is so that you can see the backend and the amount of data that we have in the backend on the database. I mean, the whole idea is for you to see front end at work, and then the API doing some work as well, and then all of those data showing up on your database. All right, so I will give you guys 2 minutes. The link to the app has been shared in the chat section, so do well to click on it, and then you go to the add. You click on the add button, and then you add quotes as you wish, right? Okay, so you click on add quotes, and then you add a quote. I like this particular quote. Don't be serious, just be sincere. And then I put my name, DJ Bimbola, and put the tags, and then create quotes, and that should show up. All right, nice. You guys are already working. I see a new quote from Oluwaseun Percy. That's nice. All right, I give you guys a couple of minutes to just do that, and then we'll come back to look at what data we have in the database. All right, let me pull my database client into the screen so that you guys can see what we have so far. I think it's just one person that has gone ahead to do that. But anyway, without wasting much time, we have this data so far. So we have one from Sam Levinson. That's good as well. So you can explore the structure of the database. Here we have an ID, which is a data type UUID, and then we have text, which contains the quote. It has a data type varchar, and then author, varchar, tags, text. Tags is actually is an array, but for Postgres, how Postgres deals with array is that it converts it to a string that is concatenated by or separated by a comma, and then by the time we are reading it, it converts it back to an array. And then we have a created art, which is a timestamp. A timestamp is essentially a date and a time, and then you have an updated art. Then going back to the data, you see all of that. For an ID, this is ID for And let's view this. Okay, this is the ID for that piece of data there, and so on and so forth, right? So that's that for the database. I mean, some of you might be wondering, and again, fine, it might seem a little bit complex now, but I do hope that this illustration will just make things clear in your mind. Some people might be wondering, where do you put the data? How do you pull the data? And how do you display the data? And I'm hoping that all of this that we have shown, we sort of make all of that clear to you. Okay, so you guys can continue playing with the code, with the app itself. And like I mentioned, you have access to the full code base, and you can also host it if you want. There is a README file in each of the code base that describes how you can have it running on your own end. I think the part that we might need to explain is the database portion, but we'll do that when we come back from taking our attendance. Okay, so before we go into taking our attendance, I think we can utilize the few minutes remaining to actually add one more function. Maybe I should ask you guys which function you want us to add, and then we'll go ahead and do that. And then while waiting for that, let's see if there are questions. So Peter, you were saying that so you need help, that your npm run dev shows missing script dev. You should check your package.json and ensure that under the scripts section there is indeed a script called dev. Let me see if I can quickly show you that. Let's open a new VS Code. Basic API. Okay. So if you go to your package.json, you should have a dev. Okay, now I see what the challenge really is. You know, we add different branches containing the codes that we did the last time, and I'm guessing you are referring to this particular one. So if this is what you have, all you just have to do is pull the latest one, okay, and I think you should be fine. I see open developer DSA. There's a kind. So we have this basic API, right? Okay. Well, that's essentially what you need to do anyway. Like pull from the latest branch. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. So if you want to build a backend with Django, you can go ahead and do that. I mean, it doesn't have to be with TypeScript. The whole idea is you have an API layer and then you have a front end to read. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock now, and I think you guys will be taking your attendance very soon. So you guys can go ahead and do that, and I will go through the questions that you have. And for Peter that has that challenge, let me really figure out what might have been the challenge, and then we'll come back to that once we come back from taking attendance. And as much as possible, you guys should continue to interact with the app as well. I'm actually also trying to see at what point we begin to see a performance drop in the app. Like what happens when we have 100 quotes? What happens when we have 1,000 quotes? I mean, there are ways around those. I mean, you can now start paginating the quotes and all, but I just want to see at what point the app begins to break. All right, go ahead and take your attendance. I think the link will be provided very soon. All right, welcome back, guys. Okay, so for the questions that we left off with, Peter, you had a challenge with finding the dev script. So I wouldn't know what happened on your side, but I think what you should do is to clone the repository again. So I went ahead and did that on my own side, and everything seems all right. So I wouldn't know what happened there that you couldn't get the up-to-date code base. So this is what I have on my own end now for DSA basic API. So in the package.json, I have this start. So like I mentioned, I said there is an update to the basic API. So now in the script section, what we just have is the start script, right? But if you're referring to the other project, which is this Remix React project, my package.json, this is what it looks like. I have a build, I have a dev, I have a lint, and all of that. And looking at the repository online, it does have all of those as well. But whatever the case, just pull again, and then we see what happens from there. Okay, that's that about that. So where we left off was showing you how to pull data from an API, right? And some of you might be wondering that, okay, we've been interacting with this app. What happens when people start deleting and all of that? Why can't we safeguard that? And that you'll be learning in your next class, how to do authentication and authorization. And where authentication and authorization comes into play is that with authentication, you are ensuring that whoever is having access is authenticated to have that access. And with authorization, you are ensuring that whatever it is they are doing, they have the authorization to do it. So let's say, for instance, someone who already logged in into the app start deleting all of the codes that we've created. And I'm hoping that none of you will go ahead to start deleting all of the stuff we have created so far. But imagine such happens. We don't have any control over it, right? And you can even have a login and register, and someone registers and all of that, and still goes ahead to delete all of the codes that we have created. But we can have authorization in such a way that your authorization level is limited to just creating codes, and you don't have authorization to delete codes. Or it may also be that all that your authorization have is to just read the codes, but you can't create, you can't delete. You will need an elevated authorization to do that. Maybe like an admin, you have to be an admin to create a code or to delete a code. But anyway, that you will learn in your next class. I have one other question here. Someone was asking what the difference is between a website and an app. So when it comes to website, most of the time you are just displaying information for people to see. But when we are saying an app, there's interactivity that is built into it. So it's not just looking at information. You're actually using the website, well, for lack of a better term, let me call it a website, to actually achieve something. So let's say you work with Excel. When you work with Google Sheet is an app because it actually helps you work with an Excel sheet, right? When it comes to our Quotes app, it's actually an app because you can create, you can delete, you can view an app, and you can do all of those, right? So the difference lies in what, all of them at the end of the day are websites because they have a URL and you can visit it. But what you get to do on the website now defines if it's a web app or just an ordinary website. Okay, so that's the response to the question about difference between website and web app. All right, so for this next phase now, we will we'll try to explore the API to see the changes that has happened so far. And then we explore the full app to see all of the things that I have added to help us get to this point, like just to help us get to where this app is currently. Like we have this is a component, and then we have the add new code that is a component and all of those, right? So I'll show you all of that in the code base so that when you are doing your own study, you know where to look at as well. Okay, let's go back to all codes. Let's see. Okay, more codes came in. That's nice. All right. So let's jump right back into our code editor. And I will open the code base for the backend, which is DSA Basic API. Again, it's something that you are familiar with. You've worked with it before. We've shown you severally. So I'm hoping that you still maintain some level of familiarity with it when you're looking at it. All right, let's close all of these ones so that we are not confused by. Okay, so for a server or an API, there's an entry point which we already defined when we started this project. So the entry point is this index.tx. So what has changed since that time now is we have a data source, and now a data source is like a database. What this code is saying essentially is that initialize a database, and that app data source, we defined it in the config. So config is like the configuration for the API. So you say in the configuration we want to have a database configuration, and in our database configuration we said the type of the database should be Postgres. This could also be MySQL, right? And it could be many other databases. It could be Aurora MySQL, Aurora Postgres, which is same thing as Postgres. It could be MongoDB. We talked about NoSQL, so it could be MongoDB, it could be MariaDB, it could be any of those. But for now, we are using Postgres. Okay. So you might be wondering that, okay, what is this in itself, right? And most of the time, in explaining the question that might be coming up in your mind, that what is all of this, there's such a thing that is called an ORM, right? So it maps objects to a database. And what do I mean by that? When we're working with the front end, we said let's define an interface for quotes. Inside quotes, it has an ID, it has a text, it has tags, it has author. So what an ORM does is that you already have that data in your database. It just provides like a mapping between an interface that you have in your code and then the data that exists in your database. And ORM also performs much more than that, right? It's not just in the mapping, like it also helps you in fetching data that you have in your database. So it's going from object and creating a mapping to the relational database that you have, hence the name ORM. So object relational mapping. So we have so many ORMs that you could use when you're working with TypeScript, and there are some ORMs that you can use when you're working with other frameworks, like Laravel. If you guys have heard of Laravel before, they have Eloquent. And what Eloquent does is that it makes it easy for you to interact with your database. When you go through this code base, you see that there are no SQL. It's not like you are saying select all from quotes where ID equals this. You see that we have nothing like that. So that abstraction is what ORM does for us. So here in the database configuration, we are saying we have a type Postgres, and the host is stored in this DB host. I'll be sharing that with you because it contains passwords and stuff that are mine, and I wouldn't want to expose that to the internet, right? So we have a DB host that has a string that is pointing to a database hosted on AWS somewhere, and we have an exposed port to that database. It has a username, a password, a database name, and so on and so forth. And then you have other options like synchronize. Synchronize is saying that you should sync everything that you have in the code base with what you have in the database. We don't want that to happen in our case because we already have data in the database. If a synchronization happens, it will wipe out the data, right? I don't want to deal with data loss, right? I mean, imagine you have 100 terabytes of data in your database, and then you forget to turn this off, and you push it to production, right? And it wipes out all your data when you don't have a backup. So all of these other options are there. Login, you can set this true when you're in development, right? And it shows you all the query that is being run. And the entities point to the object. You know, I mentioned that this is an ORM, object relational mapping. And this is the entity, an object, right? You see that it's similar to what we had on the front end when we said a quote contains an ID, a text, an author, and tags. So here it's saying a quote has an ID, a text, author, and tags. But in addition to that, it's showing a created at and updated that. Comparing this with what we have in our database, like I showed us earlier, you see the correlation. So that is the mapping that is actually really happening. So from your code base, you get a mapping to the database. So ID, text, author, tags, created at, and updated at, right? All of this here. Oh, nice. You guys are adding more and more. That's good. Okay. So that's the mapping that is going on, right? And then we say subscribers, or well, for subscribers now, let's look beyond that. I think that might be much advanced for where we currently are. But for migration and then migration table names, you know, I was talking about synchronize. So to mitigate having to wipe your data off, you can adopt migration. And what migrations do, let me quickly go over to that. Migration defines like, it could be a data migration, it could be a schema change. And I hope you guys remember what a schema is. A schema defines the structure of a table in your database. So in this case, we have a table called quotes. So a schema will define the structure of that table. And you see the schema here. It says create a table named quotes that has an ID, which is of type UUID, that is not null, and has a default. So it's calling this function UUID generate v4, right? So this is a schema. So you can have a migration file that does a schema or inserts values onto a table, which is what we are having here, okay? And that's a safer way to change a schema or insert data into a database that already has data in it. And you see two aspects to the migration. You have a up and you have a down. By the way, the ORM that I'm using in this case is a type ORM. Like I mentioned, there are many other ORM. There's Prisma I mean, just a few of them out there that you get to. There's a SQLize and many more out there, right? That you can get to work with. But I feel like TypeORM is quite straightforward. It's quite straightforward. It's not complicated. Also, Prisma is also quite straightforward. I mean, for the most part of it, they are quite straightforward. And for you that you're just learning, I think some of the things that you need to understand with ORM is how to use it to model the data that you want to work with. In our case here, the data that we have is quote. And how we use that to model it is what we have in this entity. We say we have a code that has an ID, has a text, an author, and all of that, right? And this is the model for the data that we are dealing with, okay? So now we've looked at the entities and looked at the database configuration. Where we started from was the index, where we said the app data source should initialize. So in the initialization, what it essentially does is that it asks for all these details, the database host, the database port, username, and use that to connect to the database, which is the same thing that we have done with these database clients that I showed earlier. So it's the same thing that we have here actually. Like we provided it with a database name, a host, a password, and is able to connect to our database and show us all the data that we have in it, okay? And going back to the migration that I was saying earlier, migrations are also stored on the database so that the database can know the last migration that was run. You know, as your app grows, this folder will also grow. And that table, this table here, we keep a track of the last run migration so that it knows what migration to run next and which one to skip. So that's that for the initialization process that happens in the app entry point. So what is going on here is we are saying that once initialization is done, then create a server. All of this existed in the app before we connected it to a database. We say create a server and start and handle requests. Then the server should listen on the port 3000. This is defined in the .env file. Okay, another thing that you might run into as a challenge is that you need to actually create a .env file once you pull the code from GitHub. Like I mentioned, I have database secrets in my own env. That's why it was not pushed to GitHub repository. And now if I want to actually make this code work, I will need to provide those database secrets. And it's something that is quite easy to come by, right? All you just need to have is an AWS account, and AWS does provide you free database instances. So you go to AWS and create an account, and I mean, you can easily find a guide on that, like where to host a Postgres database or how to host a Postgres database on AWS. So that's that for where the app starts from. Now to something similar to what we had on the front end. You know, I said that we should separate concerns, that it makes working in our code base easier, right? But before we get into services, which is where I was going to, we'll talk about type. Type just contains the types like we had on the front end earlier. We have a quote type that has ID, text, author, and tags, right? And then we have API response, which is also similar to what we had on the front end, right? But looking at server, this is where all requests. So let's say you get to the endpoint, and that reminds me, someone was asking what the meaning of an endpoint is. So we described an endpoint to be more or less like a pointer to a resources. And a resource would be like a piece of data that exists probably on your server or in your database. So an endpoint points to a piece of data. So in our case here, an endpoint is pointing to a piece of data like a random quote, or it's pointing to a list of quotes. So the endpoint pointing to a random quote in our own case right here is quotes/random, and the one pointing to a list of quotes is /quote. And then you have an endpoint that allows you to add more quotes. I think that one is quotes/add. I mean, I can't remember exactly now, but you get the point, which is each endpoint points to a resource, and a resource, you can either get a resource, or you post a resource, or you delete a resource, or update a resource, right? So back to what we are saying in server.ts. So all requests comes to the server.ts. And mind you, all of this we have written out without using a library. If you want to continue writing APIs with TypeScript, what people typically use, you'd use an Express library. It's called Express, which makes working with API a lot easier. So you wouldn't need to write all of this out. I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing all of this function out, like undo get quotes, undo create quotes, right? And having to manually undo how routing happens. Let me take you to where routing happens. So this undo request is one that actually handles the request and sends the request to where it should actually go to. So all your request comes in here. So all of this set header and set this and set all of that. If we were to be using Express, we wouldn't need to do that, because Express sort of mask all of this for us. So it abstracts away all of this implementation detail, because it's a library that is really meant for creating servers, right? Especially when it comes to Node.js, or when you're dealing with TypeScript API backend. So here now we are saying when a request comes in and the path for that request is pointing to quotes, then we know that, oh, this person wants to get quotes, like get all quotes, especially when the method of the request is a get. But if the method of the post of the request is a post, then you should call a create quotes. If the quotes, if the path is quotes /random, which is the question that was asked earlier, right? That was an endpoint. So all of these are endpoints, and they are pointing to something in the backend, like, oh, undo get random quotes. Let's take undo get random quotes for instance. This is where undo get random quotes is defined, right? And in the function definition, we are expecting a response. We are injecting a server response and a quote service, and we're saying, oh, await the quote service, which now takes me to the quote service itself, which is a separation of concern, like I was describing earlier, that you should separate things out. If we had not separated this get random quote out, what would have happened is that in our server, we'll have been doing something like this. We'll have been doing something like this in our server, right? And by separation of concern, a server should not concern itself really with a database. Like a server should just handle requests and route where the request should go to. So a server has no business with pulling data from a database. So you should just focus on what concerns it, which is route data to where it should go to, route a request to where it should go to, and then have some other function handle whatever it is that is needed. So that's what separation of concern really is. Okay, so that's that for the structure of what you have on the back end. And I do hope that by the time you guys pull this code down and really go through it, it will be clearer. Before now, we were reading from a JSON file, not from a database, but now we are reading from a database. So I will pause a bit to see if there are questions pertaining to all of this that I have showed us. Yeah, someone is saying this is too much for a beginner. No, it's not too much actually. And the reason why I say it's not too much is as a beginner, you want to get as much information as can be provided you. Yes, it may seem overwhelming at first, but if all that we just showed you is how to declare a variable, or how to do multiplication and division using TypeScript, you will feel like that's the end of the world to programming. I mean, I've seen a lot of people that just come out and say, oh, programming is so easy. I don't know why people are saying it's very hard. And again, it's not like I'm saying, oh, programming is the hardest thing in life. But people, when they come out to say, oh, programming is very easy, it's because of the exposure they have, really. I mean, someone might come out and say, oh, it's not just to pull out WordPress and then you have a web app already. I mean, they may be right, but if you want to build something that scales, if you really want to build something that scales indeed, you won't use WordPress for everything. WordPress, as it uses, is to manage content, create good website. I mean, people can get creative. They can create an e-commerce site and all. But you should ask yourself the question: why are the e-commerce sites that you know, why are they not using WordPress? So by the time you start asking that question, you begin to understand that, oh, okay, there might be indeed a reason behind it. So again, why we throw all of this information to you is just so you know that, okay, there's so much to learn, and this is so much I should try to learn, right? We don't expect you to understand everything at a go, okay? But we just want to show you the scope of what software development might be. And mind you, this is just showing you web development. We've never started talking about building a product on a smartwatch, for instance, or we've not talked about building mobile apps. I mean, software development can even get you into writing embedded systems. You have a microwave at home that you can program and time, or you can change the wattage of the power it draws per time. All of those are the work of a software developer. Yes, they are focused, or that particular software developer might be focused on embedded systems, or you have your washing machine that you can time and that knows how much water to pull in. All of that are programming. I mean, we are just showing you a part of it which is really leaning into web development and all, right? Or web, creating a product on the web, or writing software for the web. I mean, just think about the much more things out there. So the more that we expose you guys to, we are actually hoping that your mind will expand to the point where you know that there's just a lot to learn, and then you devote yourself to learning all of it, or learning as much as you can learn. All right, Daniel, you have a question about Netlify. I think what you should do is go to the LMS, create a discussion, and then let me know exactly what you need help with, and I will try to get into that discussion and help you, right? And then, okay, maybe I should use this opportunity to also address the issue around using ChatGPT. So, I myself have been using ChatGPT for, I think, going to 3 years now before it really became so popular. And I myself have tried coding with AI. And what I will tell you guys as beginners, even for those who are experienced, just limit your AI usage to the minimum as much as you can, because you generate all the code, you don't even understand what is going on with the code. And a lot of people have been saying this. I mean, if you guys follow the news around vibe coding and all, you see a lot of engineers coming out to say, um, yeah, just, I mean, my advice at the end of the day is don't rely too much on it. Don't rely too much on it. Aside the fact that it also makes mistake, but for your level, you want to learn. You want to learn and understand everything that is going on. It's not just enough to build something fancy and say, oh yeah, I coded that. You as a software engineer should be able to understand what is going on. And the funny thing is, the better understanding that you have, the better you might be able to utilize AI in supporting what you're coding. And I myself have a fair experience in that, right? Like, you want AI to create a system, I mean, quite a complex system, right? You need to have an understanding of system architecting, client server, or have an understanding of Docker, how to containerize and all of that before you can even prompt the AI to do it. But if what you're looking for is just to create a fancy looking website, I mean, that's all good. But if what you're looking for is to become a world class software developer, I would really advise you that at this level, understand the fundamentals of programming rather than vibe coding. Okay? So that's just a segue. I mean, that's just a digression from what we are talking about. Okay, so now that we've covered the back end, let's talk about the front end. So we explore all the code for the front end that has been written so far, and I'll try to explain the different parts of the code. So what we did earlier before we went on break was to write a component that shows the quotes, and we wrote a service layer as well that interacts with the API to pull the data from the API. So now I will do a walkthrough for all of the components that we have in the repo that I shared with you. Okay, so let's get into that. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to VS Code now and open. All right, let me look for and open the project for the front end. I think I called it Basic React. Basic React. Okay, great. So let's start with the project structure. I know someone was already trying to set all of this up. And for the person trying to set all of this up, you don't need to do the netlify part yet, okay? I believe this is where the person got stuck, which is npm install g netlify CLI. You really don't need this part for now, so you can skip it, okay? And just do npm install, and then you run npm run dev. I mean, just leave the part of netlify for now. Just run this. Like, after you do your npm install, just do npm run dev, and you should be fine. And what I did for you guys also is that you can run this app by itself without having to have your API already running. So what I did was connect this React app to the hosted API, so that in case you are still struggling with setting up a database, you can still interact with the app regardless. So in the code service, this is what we are using, just like I showed you earlier. All right, so let's do a quick walkthrough. Let me collapse all of this. So like a typical Remix app, you have your app folder, and I already explained that we have routes, and in my explanation earlier, I showed us that there is an index.txs. Let me increase this font a little bit more. So I showed you that you have a route underscore index.txs, which is like the home page. So when you hit this page, where you land is this. Okay, this has gone cold again. Let's hope it comes back to live. Okay, it's back live now. So when you hit the index.txs, this is what you are shown, which is the same as what we coded earlier, like that shows the random codes, right? So that's that for the index.tsx. And then when you go to your quotes.underscore index.txx, I think you guys should read more on routing for Remix to really understand how all of this works, but I will explain. So when you go to your, when you hit slash quotes, what happens is it loads this quotes.underscore index.txs, which also we can do like this. We can just say quotes.txs and it should be fine. But because we also want like an edit page, and we want to maintain the structure of the URL in such a case that when we click on edit and it takes us to the edit page, we are saying that it should maintain a structure of slash quotes, then slash the ID, then slash edit, which is what we see here. You see a quote and you see the ID. If we look for this ID on the database, you should see it. Right, let's say ID equals oh, this is where SQL. ID contains this. You see that we can see the ID on the database. But anyway, this allows us to structure the URL that you have a quote slash an ID slash an edit. Same thing with new. Like when you go to add new quotes, you see a quote slash new. So all of this contain the codes for these different pages that I just showed you. Okay. So let's look at quotes.index, for instance. Or let's start with the familiar one, the home page, which we coded earlier in the class. You still remember when I said we have a loader function, and same thing is here. We still have that loader function, and then we are pulling quotes as the data from the loader, from the data that was loaded in the loader function, using this React hook. We use loader data type of okay, which provides us a quote, and then in that we have all this copy. We have this copy as well. This copy, you see it on the home page. Discovering discover inspiring code, blah, 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 which is same thing here. All of this is just styling. We are using a Tailwind class name to style them. And then we have a link for view all quotes, which is right here. And then we have a random quote. So you see that this random quote is different from a typical HTML tag. This is called a component. And we have our component defined in the component folder. If you had gone through the portfolio website that we built, you will notice that we also have similar thing where we have components, we have a navigation, and so on and so forth. I think we had a hero page, a hero section, which was a component. We have my work component, and so on and so forth. Same thing is happening here. We have a random quote component, and then come down to our components. You see it defined here. So let me explain what's going on in the random quote. And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about maintaining state. Or when we talk about state, we are talking about the state of the app per time. So there are several states that can exist in an app. You can have a loading state. You can have a state that keeps a data, for instance. So let's say you have a new quote that you just created. You can save it temporarily by using state. All of this you can read up on, but just a way of explaining why we have all of this. We are just maintaining some set of data that are required for that component's random quote. So what is happening right here is this random quote has a props. And I remember in your class for React, your instructor talked about props. So it has a props called quote. And how do we use that props? Going back to where random quote is being used, we have these props here being passed the data that we add from our loader function. So essentially, we pull this data and we are sending the data to the random quote component. And when it gets to the random quote component, this is what happens. We say create a state for a new quote, but that new quote sets the props that was passed into the component as the default. And this double question mark is saying that if this quote does not exist, and then set the default to null. But also inside this component, we are also fetching a random quote, right? We are also fetching a random quote, and that fetching only happens when we click the button on this component. So here is what is happening. By default, when you land on the page, a quote is fetched. This is due to the loader function executing the API call, and it passes that result into the random quotes component. But if you want to get fresh one, then you click on the button and then it gets a fresh one for you, right? And this is the function that is doing that. So this undo refresh is a function that is called in the button, right? Get new quotes. Oh yeah, this get new quotes button right here. You see, get new quote button. So that's where undo refresh is being called. So as I was explaining earlier, when that props is passed in, we set the quotes. But that doesn't automatically happen here. We are saying when this, again, use effect is a hook you can also read up on, but essentially what happens is, what it does is that it runs automatically by itself. So when you load this component random quote, this portion of the code runs automatically, and it's saying that if there is a quote props, set it as a new quote, and whenever that quote changes, ensure that this runs again. Essentially, that's what is happening right here, right? So that's that for a random quote. Let's quickly jump into some of the other components that we have before we end the class for today. Again, some of the benefits of we doing this code run through is that when you start working on your own project, I know some of you are doing this for the first time, but when you start working on your project, you can easily come back to these things, or when you are doing your own study, you can easily come back to these things and try to understand any part that may be proving difficult for you, okay? So let's look at a quote list. And I remember one of the questions that you guys asked the last class was, how do we utilize data structures in the front end? I did show how array mapping works then. Same thing here as well. So we define an interface for this quote list component. It is a component, and the interface is saying that quote has this following props. A quote, which is a list of quotes, is deleting, which is a state that is telling us if a delete action is happening, and on delete is a function which is passed into the component. So wherever this quote list is being used, it expects to see these three props passed to it. So let's take a look to see where it is being used. So quote list is being used in quotes. So you see quote list here, and where it's being used, like I mentioned, it expects to see a quote, it expects to see an onDelete, which is a function that is passed, and then is deleting. It expects to see all of that, which is what the props interface is essentially saying that should be available to it. So what quote list is doing is this. Like I mentioned, is expecting a quote list. So let's see where quotes is being generated from. Again, it's using the same loader data that we had used earlier, but this time around it's getting all quotes. So it's not just getting a random quote like what we did in the coding session. It's getting all quotes, and this quote is passed into the page body via this use loader data that we've also have used before. So the quote then continues its journey, then is being passed into this quote list. So in this quote list side now, what we have here, which is essential to this quote list, is we have quotes being mapped through. You see quotes here, dot map, and then it takes each quote and shows the text, then shows the author. And remember, tags is not just one tag. There are several tags. You can have 5 tags. You can have 2 tags. So that also is saved in an array, and you use a map to also display the data in that, which is what you are seeing here, and which is what birthed this. So for these quotes now, it has 2 tags, keep going, and then motivational. So this is the portion that is doing that tags. So essentially, this is what quotes is doing here. And then we come to the edit portion of the quote. Remember earlier when I was showing you that you can click on edit. We have to go to all quotes first. Click on edit, and then it takes you to a page where the edit happens, and this is where that happens. So when you click on edit, it is a link that links to this page, quote/code ID/edit, which is what you see in the address bar. So let's look at the the route that handles this. So whenever this link is clicked, this route is opened, and in the route we have our loader function that is loading a quote by ID. I remember your instructor talking about passing params to a component, right? To a top level component, and this is what we have here. So the params in this case has an ID in it, so an ID must be present. This is what this is saying. So with the ID present, we get quotes by ID. Let's jump right into what quote by ID is doing, which is in our service layer right now, right? So a quote by ID is expecting an ID string, and then it's fetching an API, which is quotes/ID, right? So I think what we should even do, just for the fun of it, let's grab this ID and then go to our hopscotch. We said we need quotes/ID. So instead of doing random, we just paste the ID of the quotes and then we send. And then you see that it came with the response. This is that it will never come again is what makes life so sweet, George Eliot. And then we go back to this page, we see George Eliot, right? So the API essentially is calling this service is essentially calling the API endpoint, providing an ID, and then gets a response that is fed back into this route. So just like we had on our index, we have a loader calling the quotes by ID, and then we pull that data using use loader data, and the quote is then displayed in the form. We have a form here where the edit happens. So the quote is being displayed in that form, this quote form here. All right, so that's really that about the app. It's quite a simple app, but it really touches on most of the things that you will come by on a day-to-day. I mean, whatever app you want to build right now, you have to take user input at some point. You have to allow your users edit, right? Okay. So that's that for what we have today. And thank you guys for joining. You can go over the video again and again just to grasp better understanding. If there's any challenge, jump into the discussion, ask your question. I'll be there to answer you. All right, do have a wonderful evening, and then we'll see you on Wednesday, which is tomorrow.